Hi everyone, it's Laura and I'm here to give you my April wrap-up. So this was a very unusual month for me. I felt like I was having a stellar month and I read a lot. It was very productive, both reading-wise and then personally. And then I, for the first time ever, did a 24-hour reading challenge, which I just finally finished editing and posting on my channel. And I finished that Easter weekend, so that basically gave me about a week left in the month or so. And I think I only read one book, maybe two, and the rest of the month after that reading challenge. So there was a sharp decline in my productivity reading-wise. So when I actually look at my numbers, I ended up reading less page-wise in April than I did in March, which was actually really surprising to me, but it's just interesting when you actually break things down that way. So the first book I read of the month was Ne'er-Do-Well, and this was kind of a Regency era romance where a man who grew up in America, Louisiana in particular, he unexpectedly inherited a dukeship, and so he came back to England and he was trying to gain guardianship of his two half-siblings, but due to the fact that his father never officially claimed them, he was having trouble in the courts and he was up against a conservative judge. And partially due to the difference in culture and just the difference in how he approached things and he thought about things, he was very progressive. He tended to run into scandals quite easily. So he was trying to brainstorm ideas and he ended up turning to a socialite that he was acquainted with in order to try and figure out how he can gain guardianship. And her idea was that if he court women and marries one in a timely fashion, and if she had unimpeachable character as a high-class woman, that she would bring stability and legitimacy to his claim, and that the judge would be more likely to hear his side of things. So he goes about courting 3 different people that she has recommended while simultaneously falling in love with her. And I didn't mention names because I believe the Duke's name, this was the very first book that I read at the start of the month, and I forgot to reacquaint myself. I think his name was Peter and her name was Celine. If that's wrong, I'm sorry, like I said, but this was an audiobook only. But I really ended up liking this a lot. I really enjoyed them. I like the characters. I like the mishaps they run into. I like the side characters. I like the romance. It was a very cute, wonderful book. I gave it a 4. I might actually even bump it up more in the future. I don't know. Ratings are also subjective at the time, but I gave it a 4. And I'm definitely interested in listening to more of the books in this standalone companion series. So after that, I listened to another audiobook, Take a Hint, Dani Brown. This was continuing in the series from Talia Hibbert after Get a Life, Chloe Brown. This is her sister, Danica Brown, and she is a bisexual professor who is completing her PhD, and so she's just kind of looking for a friends with benefit situation. She is adamant that she's not interested in or capable of having a romantic relationship, and her last friends with benefits caught feelings, so she's praying to a goddess for signs to give her another friends with benefits. And then it turns out that the security guard from the building that she teaches on campus in, Zafir, he's an ex-professional rugby player, and there was a fire drill where she got caught in an elevator and he ends up pulling her out, and in their flustered state after everything that's happening, he ends up carrying her out of the building, and clips of that go viral online. People recognize him, and so it kind of becomes like a hashtag about Dr. Rugby, and they decide to capitalize on the fame because he runs a nonprofit and the attention is helping him with donors to help educate the emotional intelligence of young men in sports. And she is hoping to kind of turn their fake dating situation into a physical one so that she can get what she needs, but they catch feelings and it goes from there. And I also really like this book a lot. Overall, I enjoyed Chloe Brown's story, but I had my issues with kind of how the romance developed and with the actual characters. But I liked both Zafir and Danica, or Dani, much better. And I'm eager to see what the third sister's books, Eve Brown, is about now and see where that falls. But I gave this book a 4.5. I really enjoyed it and I was very happy with how it turned out. And then I finished the Abby Jimenez standalone trilogy of Part of Your World, Yours Truly, and Just for the Summer. And this is a book with Emma and Justin. And Justin, he did an Am I the Asshole Reddit post where he asked if he was the asshole for naming his new very, very ugly adopted dog after his best friend slash ex-roommate who kind of left him high and dry with a lease after hooking up with Justin's ex-girlfriend. Very complicated to put it like that. And it turns out that he kind of has a gift where every girl he's dated in the last few years, as soon as she breaks up with him, she finds the quote unquote one. And that's part of the post. And it turns out Emma has had similar instances where the guys she breaks up with have also found the one after breaking up with her. And so Emma's best friend shows her the post. She gets in touch with Justin and their communications quickly turn more personal and they get along really well. And Emma and her best friend, I believe her name was Maddie, are traveling nurses. And so Emma is able to persuade her best friend that their next temp assignment will be in Minnesota, where Justin is. The idea is they can fake date and then break up, and then they'll each find the one and hopefully break the curse. But they get feelings for each other, but they both have complicated issues with their families. Justin has to take guardianship of his 3 younger siblings for a time, and Emma has a very toxic relationship with her mother. And this was just a very good book. And while sometimes some of these situations made me want to smack the characters over the top of the head, especially Emma, and just tell her to like open her eyes and wake up, I do think that the characters were written very realistically. And as the 3rd book in this series, I really liked seeing how the characters from the first 2 books popped up and what roles they played. And I really, really liked this book a lot, so I gave this a 4.5. Then there was the nonfiction book Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green that I listened to, which I found very fascinating because I had watched a video that John Green did on his YouTube channel kind of about how his fascination with tuberculosis started with him meeting a 16-year-old boy named Henry in Sierra Leone, and how he didn't realize how many people in this day and age are actually suffering and dying from tuberculosis, which is curable with the right medications, but just for the access to the correct diagnostic equipment, to the correct medication and transportation issues of actually getting to the places for treatment. And then in a lot of these other countries, the social stigma that's involved with having tuberculosis and just all of the host of issues that there are, it was very eye-opening. And so I was interested in picking up this book when I saw that he was due to write a book all about tuberculosis. And this kind of touches more about his story about meeting with Henry and going down this rabbit hole, but it also summarizes kind of the history of tuberculosis in this world and how the mindset has changed over time, and how it was first called consumption, and then how it was almost kind of looked at as like an artistic disease, and how poets and novelists, they did their best work when they had consumption, and that it was almost like a beauty standard in some artwork. And then how once sanitation and health standards improved for the wealthier class and they didn't fall prey to this disease as much, and it became more of a sickness for the working and lower class, that all of a sudden it kind of became stigmatized. And it was very interesting seeing all these different historical takes on it and about the treatment process and the different steps that were taken to kind of come up with a cure. And there were mentions of other people and their books that they've written, memoirs of when they were in a locked ward, getting treatment on their own. And I'm very interested in picking up a physical copy of this book for myself because I would like to reference it and reread it again when I have a chance. It is a shorter book. It was very concise, and I think that it was a nice way to dip your toes into the topic without feeling overwhelmed. So I gave this book a 4.5. Then there's the In Between Bookstore, which is a story about Darby, who he is just about to turn 30. He just lost his job in New York City, and he's very rudderless, kind of. He doesn't know what to do. He's feeling very unfulfilled, both personally and professionally, and he doesn't even know if he wants to stay in New York anymore. He's been there for about a decade. He went there for college, and he has a tight friend group, but but he's very closed off and doesn't share a lot of his internal musings with them. So when he finds out that his mom back in Ohio, Illinois, one of those, is going to be downsizing from the house that Darby grew up in into a condo, he offers to help her pack up and move. And when he goes there, he is very torn to see the changes that have been made, the modernization in his little Midwest town. And he is confronted with his ex-best friend Michael, where they had kind of a blow up, but he doesn't even really know why there was a blow up back before he went to college, and how they drifted so far apart. And he ends up going to In Between Books, which was his job as a high schooler and kind of his refuge during that time. And when he goes and steps into the bookstore, he's transported back in time to when he was 16 years old, and he actually sees his younger untransitioned self behind the desk, and he gets it in his head that he has to somehow help himself and figure out what happened between him and Michael. And I was very disappointed with this book. It was not what I hoped it would be. I kind of hated the character of Darby. He was so wishy-washy and unemotive to everyone, and then got mad when they couldn't read his mind. And then the way he took a lot of what people said, it just didn't make sense to me. And it was such a short book, but it took me forever to get through. I really hoped that the end would kind of tie things together. I liked the kind of magical realism aspect with the bookstore, but I really didn't understand the whole point of it. And it frustrated me on so many levels. So I ended up giving this a 2.5. I think initially I gave it a 3, but I've since then decided 2.5. So then there is the audiobook Only When It's Us. And again, I forget the character names in this book, my bad. But this is basically another start of a series with interconnected standalones, and I listened to it on audiobook. And this is one where there is the main female character. She's an athlete. I think it was soccer, and she is very driven to succeed, and she sometimes has let her academics slip due to her sports, and she's really hoping to get a professional deal. And all of her professors work well with her except one, who tells her that, well, if she's not here due to a game or practice or something, she can talk to this other guy, which is the male love interest. And so she tries to talk to him, and he ignores her. And it's not until much later that she finds out that it's because he's deaf. And so the professor really sucks in that book, hardcore. So I really liked the male love interest. He was very sweet and accommodating, but he was also kind of closed off because he wasn't born deaf. He became deaf after an accident. So he's kind of isolated himself somewhat, and he's only really himself with certain friends and with his family. And I didn't really root for the romance in this book because the female lead got on my nerves a lot, because she has her own trauma, and her mom was dying of cancer, so she didn't think that she needed anyone other than her mom in her life. And she was very acerbic sometimes, and it was just very off-putting to me. And I thought he was a sweetheart, and he kind of deserved someone better. I mean, granted, she could use someone like him in her life, but I had a hard time rooting for the romance, and that kind of makes it hard to fully enjoy a book. But there are more in this series, and it's because the male lead has a bunch of brothers. I believe he said he has like 6 brothers or something, and so there's a bunch of different books in the series. And he also has a sister, but his sister is already married to the dick professor that didn't warn her that he was deaf. So he was trying to somehow play wingman for his brother-in-law and expand his horizons and everything, but then he didn't warn the girl that he was deaf. And the professor, he annoyed me because he went about things ass backwards, and it was frustrating. So while I liked a lot of things on the whole, I'm fine with people getting off on the wrong foot, but this wasn't the relationship dynamic that I normally go for, and so I gave it a 3.75. I am open to reading others in this series though, because I've learned in my exploration of these types of interconnected series that just who is the main characters and vastly change my opinion of the books, and so I won't hold it against the author. The book seemed to be well written for the most part. It just wasn't the love story that worked with me. Then there's A Drop of Corruption, which is the follow-up after The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett, and I love The Tainted Cup. I was super excited to see that there was more with Anna and Din, and so what I can see, if Goodreads is to be believed, this is going to be a series where there is yet another one. It's not titled, there's no cover reveal, anything, but I'm still really excited to kind of get a Sherlock Holmes and Watson thing in a fantasy world, and I love this book a lot. This time it was a completely separate mystery that the Ides is investigating this time than the first book, so I really enjoyed that. And I like seeing kind of, there is a time jump between the first book and this book. So Anna and Din, that was their first case that they worked together in the first book, and they've worked a few cases between then and now. So it's interesting to see how the relationship has changed and how it stayed the same. And Din seems more sure of himself in his role, but he also just seems more melancholic in this book, which is a little depressing. But I did find this time it was very interesting because the person that was murdered, he seemed to escape from a closed, locked, guarded room in a tower, and there was no sign of him, and then he turned up in a river, kind of dismembered and dead a few weeks later. So solving this mystery, and this was kind of not even a part of really the Empire. This was more of a territory where they had agreed that they would be under the Empire for 100 years, and then after the 100 years they would become a part of the Empire officially. But there is a king and a monarch and nobility and different culture that kind of is part of this, not really a town because they're up on a hill, but this area of the world, and a lot of the people are part of this other nation that have come and found jobs with the Empire that Anna and Din work at. So there's a lot more kind of like Wild West attitude where the rules don't need to be followed like strictly out here, and what the Empire doesn't know can't hurt them. And then you also find more out about the gigantic Leviathan monsters that threaten this civilization in this world by attacking every rainy season from the ocean. You see more of what they do with the corpses and how they utilize the bodies of the Leviathans and what research is done on them, and how there's a special research facility out on a little island in the harbor, and it's called the Shroud. And so there's a lot more world building in this from the first book, where you kind of expand your vision of what it takes for this empire to run. And I really enjoyed this book a lot. It was a good follow-up. I liked it for different reasons than I liked the first one. I wasn't as huge a fan of Din in this book, but I still overall enjoyed the story a lot. And after the way this book ended, I'm hopeful that I will like Din more again in the next book that he's in. I ended up giving this book a 5. Next, I listened to Finding Me, which was the memoir from Viola Davis. Viola Davis, I've only really seen in a few roles. I was honestly shocked that I hadn't seen her in more roles because she just seems very culturally relevant, but I've only technically really seen her in the Help movie and as Amanda Waller in the first Suicide Squad movie, and then a few episodes of How to Get Away with Murder before I realized that the show wasn't really my type of show. But I've always been impressed with her, and when I have seen her speak publicly, she's very poised and elegant and gorgeous, and she always seemed to kind of have her act together. So hearing about her background and how she grew up dirt poor and just the abject poverty and hardships that her family went through, and even the racism in little Rhode Island as a New England girl, that really kind of hurt my heart that so close to me such things were still going on. And I didn't know that she had gone to Juilliard or that she had such a prolific stage resume, basically. And it was very interesting, especially having only listened to Kelly Bishop's memoir at the beginning of this year, just seeing the difference and similarities between the two actresses and how they kind of transitioned from New York stage work to television and movies, and the differences and the opportunities they got, and just the struggles that Viola went through, Shirley, because she is a Black woman, and how she is a dark-skinned Black woman, so that a lot of the times when she went to casting calls that were looking for Black actresses, they were really looking for light-skinned Black actresses who had white facial features. So she complained that her skin was too dark, her nose was too wide, and that when she would ever go in and embrace her natural hair, it was too big. She could tell kind of people would pull away from her in casting calls. And it's just a shame because, like I said, I think she's gorgeous, and she has a natural charisma and kind of what I think of as like the it factor of stars. And then in clips that I've seen of her and in the few acts I have seen, she has a wide range. She has such a good acting ability that it's just a shame that she had to fight so hard to get the recognition that she has. But I am happy that she did seem to make it, and I just feel bad for her that it seems like her family still has rough times, and that she did have to learn the hard way that you can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, that she can help her family, but she has to have boundaries, and she has to still take care of herself before taking care of others. So I'm really happy that I read her book. It was very sad to listen to a lot of it, but I am glad that I did take the time to listen to it, and I gave it a 4. Then there are the books from my 24-hour reading challenge. So the first book I listened to was Atlantia, and this I did tandem reading. This was about twins, Rio and Bay, and they lived in a city that was underneath the ocean. This was kind of a futuristic dystopian thing where the above world was polluted and kind of uninhabitable, so the lucky few were able to go down to this underground city, and this is many generations later, and I don't even know if they said the age. I want to say it was probably about 16 or so. They have this coming of age ceremony where you can choose whether or not you want to remain below or if you want to go above. And Rio has always wanted to go above, but her and her sister Bay, they're fraternal twins, and their mother was a high person in the political structure. She was a minister, and she died just a few months before the start of the story. There was only the 3 of them, and so once the mother was gone, her sister Bay made Rio promise that she would not go above, and so she reluctantly agreed, and thus all her hopes and dreams were basically gone with that promise. But she would do it for her sister because she loved her sister. The day of the ceremony comes for both of them because they're twins, and Bay decides to go above. And so Rio is heartbroken because not only does she lose her dream, but the person that she was willing to sacrifice that dream for is now gone. And she doesn't understand this betrayal, and gets it in her mind that she wants to escape and try and go above anyway, because there are rules kind of to maintain the population, that all of the original families, they have to at least have someone in the family line there down below. So since she's the only one left in her family, she's not permitted to go above. So it's bizarre. It's very YA. It falls into certain tropes. There's insta-love with her and another character. There's a lot of kind of wand waving, not everything's like it seems, and everything got resolved too easily at the end. I think I would have liked it more if I read it when I was younger. I looked online after the 24-hour reading challenge, and I bought this in January of 2015. So it took me over 10 years to pick this up. So I really am happy that I'm working on my physical TBR. I don't want 0 physical books on my TBR, but just having books for years on end, it's just taking up space on my shelf now, and it's just, I really want to get down to maybe like 15 or 20 books max on a physical TBR. So I'm glad I read it, but I wasn't very thrilled with it. I gave it a 3. I will be unhauling. Then I did The Full Moon Coffee Shop, which is the first translated healing fiction book that I really, really enjoyed and will be holding on to. This is the same in the way that there's a bunch of little stories about different people, but these people are tangentially related, and they stumble kind of upon this food truck that's a coffee shop, and they get advice from talking cats, and the advice is based on their astrological map basically. And I really enjoyed this book. I liked it. I liked the talking cats. I'm not a huge astrology person, but it wasn't too much. It was enough be interesting as kind of a gimmick, and it didn't feel too unrealistic because they're talking cats that are giving this advice. And I liked kind of trying to figure out how people are related or how it would all wrap up, and it was very happy. I'm definitely keeping this for future reads. So I ended up giving this a 4.25. And there was Mexican Gothic, which is kind of an outlier in the genres that I have been reading recently, but I am always open to expanding my reading, and so I am happy that I picked this up. But this particular book wasn't really for me because this is about Noemi in 1950 Mexico, who she was a city girl, and she was going to a rural town in another part of Mexico to check in on her cousin, because her cousin had written Noemi's father a disturbing letter that kind of made her seem out of sorts, and they were worried about her safety. So Noemi goes, and it's this creepy manor. Her cousin is ill and gets a lot of bed rest, has to take medicine, and then all of the in-laws are very bizarre and taciturn and robotic and just seem to be stopping her at every point when she's trying to ask after her cousin and see her cousin. She only gets very limited time with her, and this book is very good at building an atmosphere and the creeping sense of dread and not really quite sure what's going on. And it's of the kind of horror thriller vibe where you don't know, is there actually something supernatural going on? Is it like a psychological thing? What's the deal? Is there anything really wrong with her cousin? Or is she seriously just getting over an illness and she was, in a delirium from a fever or type thing? And I'm just more upset that Noemi, I think, was underutilized as a character. She seemed like such a whip smart character that cared a lot about her cousin, and yet she just kind of was willing to be overruled by all the in-laws of her cousin. And I just didn't understand why she didn't put up a fight more and why she didn't ask for assistance, because she claimed she didn't want to put up more of a fight and get thrown out and not have reinforcement for her cousin. Like, she wanted to be there for her cousin, but if she got thrown out, then get backup, get your dad. Her dad obviously cared. There were other ways to go about it, and I just felt she was very underutilized for what she was presented as being. And it was like just watching a horror movie where you're just telling the main character, do something, you're doing nothing, or you're doing the wrong thing. And so I would definitely be interested in reading more in this genre, just not this book. So I will be unhauling this book, and I gave it a 3.5. Then Murder at Spindle Manor. This was another kind of murder mystery in a fantasy world. It was very clue oriented, where is it Mrs. Plum in the dining room with the candlestick type thing, where it was a closed door inn where there was 10 people that she suspected that could be this body snatching monster that has gone on a killing spree. And so she just up front tells them, before the night's over, I will find you and I will kill you. And so then it's a whodunit, and all these characters are off the wall, over the top, and she has to kind of navigate what clues, and then they get sidetracked by a seance, and then there's another murder. And it started off really fun, and I really liked it, and I was all on board for the first 120 pages. And it's a very short book, 234 pages, I believe, and it got old really fast. It was too over the top. It ended up dragging for me, and it was so long and drawn off when you actually find out what's going on or who the murderer is or what's going on. It took chapter after chapter after chapter for her to just prove how smart she is and say how, oh, I see all of you, and this is the reason you could be the murderer, this is the reason you could be the murderer. And it's just right, 5 chapters later, who's the murderer? Who was it? They all have okay, great. Who is the murderer? And it was just, I was very disappointed in this book, so I ended up giving it a 3.5. I will be unhauling it. And A Magic Steeped in Poison. This is a book where Ning is going to enter herself in a contest in the capital city, and she has kind of these magical powers that allow her to imbue her magic into tea depending on what tea and what ingredients she brews with the tea. They have different properties based on those ingredients. They can sharpen the senses, they can kind of act as a truth serum, they can fortify the body. There's all these different things, and she's doing it because in their nation there was poisoned tea bricks in their rations, and her mom and sister have ingested the tea. Her mom passed away. Her sister is slowly dying from the poison, and she's hoping that if she wins, that she will have access to a physician or potentially a cure, that they wouldn't back in their rural little village. She runs into a lot of political intrigue and people playing games, jockeying for position in the court. And then there's also a history where the current emperor's brother, 10 years prior, tried to stage a coup, and so he was banished. And so there are people in the country that want the banished prince to come back and take over because they're not happy with how the current regime is running things. She's walking into kind of this hornet's nest unaware and just hoping to save her sister. And I found it very interesting. I liked a lot of it. It is a YA duology, so there are some YA tropes, like there is a love interest and their connection happened too quickly for my potential liking. She was very naive, and they did one of the things that I hate with some of the naive characters, where she'll like someone and then one other person will say something bad about that person. She completely switches opinions, and that just aggravates me. Like, what proves that person's more trustworthy? So overall, I gave this a 4. I am looking forward to the second book, which I hope to get to soon. And how the story concludes will probably really determine how I feel about the duology overall and what the story arc and the character progression is for this character. So currently 4. And then I only partially finished this in the 24-hour reading vlog, but I did finish it afterwards. This was volume 6 of the light novel. For that time I was reading Carnated as a Slime. It got off a little to a rough start because the beginning of the novel was more of a tactics session where they had a lot of meetings trying to figure out what steps they were going to take going forward for their nation and against their enemies and alliances. It's somewhat easier reading action scenes because I can kind of fly through it, and when certain attacks are used, yes, I have to use a little more brain power. When I actually have to like sit down and like kind of fully understand the political machinations they're plotting, it takes a little more brain power, and so I had to read slower at the beginning. But then thankfully the end of this book is going up against Clayman and Walpurgis, and so anyone who has watched the anime kind of knows what's going on there. The first half of the book was kind of slower to get through, and then I breezed through the latter half of the book. It was very interesting to see what's different in the anime, but how ultimately it is very similar, but just getting more information based in the light novel. So I'm really very eager to continue on the light novels and continue this story. Then Paris Downcourt is About to Crumble. This book, I almost DNF'd so many times. I wanted to like this book so much because this is about Paris, who he was entered in and tried out for a show that's kind of like the Great British Bake Off. They're in the UK, and he was surprised that he was selected, and then he goes, but he has crippling anxiety, and he also has some familial issues going on, and he kind of starts this romance with one of the other contestants, Tariq. And I know representation is important, and I would be very interested to see someone who actually has some sort of anxiety disorder, what their take on this book is, because I don't have an anxiety disorder, but I do have a tendency to sometimes overthink things or get in my head about situations or try and think out my decisions too much. And just me with that natural affinity, reading Paris from his perspective was making me anxious, and it was not a fun time. And if it was a different setting and I wasn't so interested in Tariq, because Tariq was a sweetheart. For anyone, this is a romance. For anyone that cares, there's like no spice other than a few kind of kissing scenes, because Tariq, he is a proud gay man who is Muslim, and he does not believe in any of that stuff before marriage. And so this is a very sweet and unspicy romance, and he deserved the world. I love Tariq. Paris. Honestly, I'm surprised that I honestly made it through this book, because I wanted to see the character arc. I wanted to see him get better and come out ahead, because anyone deserves it. But the constant thought process and the amount of I'm sorry's that he thought and I'm terribles, and it was just a lot. And I know for a fact that I only got through it because I was listening to the audiobook. I would never have gotten through it if it was just physical. But I'm unhauling it. I gave it a 2.5, and not for me overall. It was if a book makes me anxious, that's not a fun time. So, and there was The House of My Mother, which was the audiobook that I listened to about Sherry Frankie. Anyone who might be familiar with any of the internet drama in the last few years, she is Ruby Frankie's of 8 Passenger fame, her daughter, and this is telling her story about how their family kind of became the business of a family vlog channel and how that kind of ruined their lives and how Ruby was kind of toxic to begin with, but then when she became friends with Jodi Hildebrandt, that she got 10 times worse. And this is about Sherry telling her story. She is very thoughtful in that she is the oldest of the 6 children, and she only really mentions anything that second oldest Chad goes through with his permission, but all of her other siblings are still under 18, so she doesn't mention them by name, and she doesn't share any of their experiences, saying that they've been in the public enough and that if they someday want to come forward with their version of events, that they can, which I find a very thoughtful approach to her story. And it's just very sad to hear all that she went through and all that basically being part of the family channel has taken from her, and the hardship she went through and the brainwashing that some of her family members went through because of her mom and Jodi Hildebrandt. And I don't want to go too far into that in just this wrap up, but it was a very eye-opening book, and so I gave it a 5 stars. And in the last book of the month that I listened to was Interior Chinatown. This book I listened to purely because Katie Colson mentioned it in her March wrap-up, I believe, and it sounded interesting, and when I looked, it was available immediately from my Libby, and it was only like a 4-hour something audiobook, so it was a very quick listen, and it was very bizarre. I don't know if it's really my type of book, but it was very kind of experimental about Wallace Wu, who grew up in Chinatown from Chinese immigrant parents, and how they kind of became backup actors in different films and TV series, and how there was the hierarchy of background Asian number 1, or are you a delivery man, or are you a waiter or waitress at like an Asian restaurant, or are you a hostess, or are you the alluring, sexy Asian woman if you're a female? And the highest point you can get in the hierarchy is Kung Fu Man. And so his father had become Kung Fu Man, and so he wanted to be Kung Fu Man, but you could tell that his parents wanted more for him, but he kind of fell in because this was what he was comfortable with. But the way the story is told is kind of like everything is script directions and like it is actual screenplay or something. And so it took a while for me to figure out what was going on and what is the quote unquote current drama that he is acting in and what is part of his actual life. And it was very bizarre because it was like breaking the fourth wall, like when he meets a woman and then there's like stage directions, but then the woman also is like, oh, are we doing this now? And like, so it was a very bizarre but very interesting book, but I don't know if I honestly have the brain power to follow along to these types of books, but it was a very interesting read. I would be curious to see what the physical copy of the book would be like, if it makes more sense about what is the actual black and white TV show that is the TV show drama that he is a background character in the show, and then what is his actual life, like if there's different fonts or different formatting to the pages or something, but at least in audiobook format. It was a little jarring getting used to, but I did overall enjoy it, and I gave it a 4. So that was the month of April. Oh, okay, so overall I read 17 books for 5,611 pages. So this is kind of the breakdown of that. And then here are kind of the breakdowns of the moods for my reads according to my story graph. And then a chart, if I'm able to, of the genres, which it was very hard to get a screen grab of this, so hopefully I'm able to do this. And then other than that, personally, I just really had a good time this month because I used to be a very artsy and craftsy person when I was younger, and that's kind of faded away as I've gotten older. But I used to go to like Michael's, and I attended a few classes there about different things. And recently my mom had found there's a locally owned craft store here, and they have classes, and I found two that I liked, and they both happened in the month of April. One of them was Pysanky eggs. This Ukrainian art, and I'll put some pictures up here of what real Pysanky eggs look like, because 2-hour class is definitely not enough time to do anything like them, and I'm just awed by the actual art form and was eager to dip my toes into anything related to it, and my eggs were failures. I'm hesitant to even show you what these look like because they're so pathetic. Yeah, so that didn't go so well. But then I ended up going to another class at the same place, and this one was for paper quilling, which I actually really liked, and I was really happy with my project. So I'm just very happy that I have rediscovered this part of me, and that I still have an interest and a desire to make stuff. And I'm actually considering buying some more paper quilling supplies so I can try and do some of these things on my own. And so I'm just very happy with how April went overall, and I'm eager to see what May brings. And hopefully it's a good reading month, and hopefully it's a good month personally. I get overwhelmed sometimes because I have so many books in my physical TBR, and I get distracted, and I have a desire to just read so many of them that sometimes like my brain short circuits and I can't read any of them. And I start things and I don't finish them. I started Threadneedle. I got about 10% of the way in, which was 44 pages, but I didn't finish it this month. So I'm going to have to finish it this month coming up in May. It's an odd feeling where I've been without reading for so long, and now it's just like I want to read all of the books simultaneously, and it's just not possible. And I realize I have to pace myself, but I'm impatient and don't want to. So I don't know. It's just the mental gymnastics that I have to do, but hopefully it will get easier as time goes on. And I'm currently sitting at a physical TBR of 119. So hopefully, while it's not as small as I want it to be, that's progress enough that it will satisfy me, and I won't get this weird unsettled feeling that I have, and I will be just happy with what progress I can make. So here are all the physical books that I own that I read in April. And with that, this has been a super long video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.